My in-laws tried to humiliate me at my own wedding, but I had the last word. My name is Madison. I'm 31 years old, born and raised in Austin, Texas. If you'd asked me 5 years ago what my life would look like now, I would have said I'd still be teaching middle school English, maybe buying my first house, maybe dating someone steady. But life took a sharp turn when I accepted a fellowship in Dublin, Ireland. It was supposed to be a year abroad, a chance to see the world, teach, and then come home. Instead, it's where I met Declan, and where everything I thought I wanted got rewritten. Declan was 34, tall with dark hair, and that easy Irish charm that could make even the shyest person feel comfortable. He worked as an engineer, was well-spoken, funny, and kind, or at least that's how it seemed at first. He slipped into my life so effortlessly it felt like fate. We met at a local bookstore cafe, of all places, both reaching for the same copy of James Joyce's Dubliners. He joked about it being destiny. I laughed, not realizing that moment would spiral into the most chaotic chapter of my life. We started dating not long after, and things moved quickly. Weekend trips along the coast, nights out with his friends at old pubs where fiddlers played in the corner, long drives into the countryside where he'd point out castles and ruins with the ease of someone deeply tied to his roots. I was enchanted, not just by him, but by the idea of a family, a culture, a whole world so different from the one I knew. When he proposed after 2 years, I said yes without hesitation. It felt like a dream, marrying not just the man I loved, but stepping into a new life. But dreams can sour fast, and mine started unraveling the moment wedding plans began. Declan's family came from a small village in County Clare, where Irish Gaelic wasn't just a tradition, but their everyday language. I had picked up some basics during my time in Dublin, but his family spoke it fluently, rapidly, like water rushing over rocks. I couldn't follow more than a word here or there. Still, I assumed they'd try to make me feel welcome. I was wrong. It started innocently enough. During one of our first planning meetings, I suggested having parts of the ceremony in English, so my parents and siblings, who were flying in from Texas, could understand. Declan's sister, Sayabun, immediately cut me off. She laughed and said, "Oh no, it has to be entirely in Irish. That's how it's always been done in our family." I tried to push back, gently asking if we could at least include translations, but she smirked, leaned back in her chair and said, "You don't need to know. You'll get the idea." I looked at Declan, hoping for support. He didn't defend me. He didn't even meet my eyes. He just shrugged and said, "It's just tradition. Don't overthink it." That was the moment the air shifted. A cold realization crept over me. I wasn't being included. I was being managed, steered into silence. They weren't planning a wedding for me. They were planning a performance, one I wasn't meant to understand, but I told myself it was only a ceremony. One day, a tradition I didn't fully get but could go along with for Declan's sake. I convinced myself love was enough to smooth over the cracks. What I didn't know then was that those cracks were about to split wide open. As soon as the language decision was made, I realized how quickly I was being pushed out of everything. Every planning session happened in Gaelic, and I'd sit there smiling politely while the room filled with words I couldn't follow. Whenever I tried to ask a question, Siobhan or Declan's mother would wave a hand and say, "Don't worry, we'll take care of it." It wasn't just the language. It was the tone. They didn't see me as part of the family. They saw me as an inconvenience. At one meeting, Siobhan leaned across the table with a glass of wine in her hand and said, "Just show up in the dress. You'll be surprised." The others laughed. I laughed too, pretending not to care, but my chest burned. The idea that my own wedding was becoming some kind of inside joke made me feel like a guest at my own life. Even the invitations made it worse. They didn't put my name anywhere. Instead, they wrote Declan Agus and Alamiv, Declan and the Foreigner. My family back home asked me if it was some kind of Irish humor. I didn't know what to tell them. I showed the invitation to Declan, hoping he'd be angry too, but he just chuckled and said, "It's not meant to be cruel, it's just a nickname. My family's always joking." It didn't feel like a joke. It felt like erasure. And around that same time, Declan himself began to change. He became distant. He stopped talking about our honeymoon plans. He stopped holding my hand when we walked together. When I asked if something was wrong, he brushed me off with just stressed about the wedding. His kisses felt mechanical. His words clipped. I kept telling myself nerves were normal, that the man I fell in love with was still there, but I could feel him slipping further away. Then my best friend, Erin, arrived from the States. Erin is sharp, loyal, and unlike me, fluent in Gaelic. Declan's family didn't know that, and I didn't tell them. When she came with me to one of the final planning meetings, she sat quietly in the corner, sipping her tea, while the family spoke freely in their language, assuming she couldn't understand a word. That night, as we walked back to my apartment, Erin stopped in the middle of the street. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. "Maddie," she said slowly, "they're planning something, and it's not about celebrating you." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" I heard Siobhan say this wedding will finally put you in your place. I heard them talking about showing you what their family is really about. They weren't planning vows of love. They were planning a show of control. It sounded like they want to humiliate you in front of everyone. The words hit like a punch to the gut. All the unease I'd been swallowing, all the jokes and whispers I pretended didn't sting, it wasn't in my head. They really were plotting something against me. That night, I cried harder than I had in years. But underneath the heartbreak, something else started burning. Anger. If they thought they could turn my wedding into a stage for my humiliation, they were about to find out I wasn't the clueless foreigner they thought I was. The days leading up to the wedding were suffocating. Every time I walked into the O'Malley household, I felt eyes on me, measuring, mocking. Declan grew colder by the hour, his affection rationed like breadcrumbs. When I asked him directly if he still wanted to marry me, he gave a flat, "Of course I do. Stop being dramatic." But his tone wasn't love, it was obligation. Erin urged me to call it off, but I couldn't. Not yet. My parents had already flown across the ocean, beaming with excitement, ready to see their daughter marry. Canceling would devastate them. No, I decided. If Declan's family wanted a performance, then I'd give them one. On my terms. The morning of the wedding arrived with a gray Irish sky, heavy clouds threatening rain. I slipped into my dress, lace, long-sleeved, elegant but simple. My mother kissed my cheek, tears already forming in her eyes, while my father squeezed my hand and told me I looked radiant. Their faith in me steadied my nerves. I would not let anyone see me break. When we arrived at the church, the whispers started instantly. Declan's relatives crowded near the entrance, speaking rapidly in Gaelic, casting glances at me and then snickering. Erin stayed glued to my side, translating every word under her breath. "They're saying you look like you're playing dress-up, that you don't belong here, that today will show everyone where you stand." My pulse quickened, but I held my head high. If they wanted to play dirty, so be it. I had something planned. The ceremony began entirely in Gaelic, just as they had insisted. My parents sat stiffly in the pews, smiling politely, clearly lost. Declan barely looked at me as we stood at the altar. His family's smirks grew wider with every word spoken in a language my side of the family couldn't understand. Then came the vows. Declan spoke his fluently, his voice smooth and strong. The congregation nodded in approval, pride glowing on their faces. When it was my turn, the priest handed me the script his family had prepared for me, entirely in Gaelic, of course. They expected me to stumble, to mispronounce, to embarrass myself in front of everyone. But instead, I took a deep breath, smiled sweetly, and handed the script back. Then, clear and steady, I began reciting my vows in perfect Gaelic. The church fell silent. Not a whisper, not a shuffle, nothing but stunned faces staring at me as I spoke their language with confidence and precision. I hadn't told anyone, not even Erin, that I had secretly been learning Gaelic for months. Every night after work, every quiet morning with coffee, I studied, determined to bridge the gap they thought would always divide us. And now, here I was, proving that I wasn't the outsider they imagined. As I finished, I looked directly at Siobhan. Her mouth hung open, her face drained of color. The smirk she always wore was gone. For the first time, I had their full attention, not as the clueless American, but as someone who refused to be silenced. And in that charged silence, I realized I wasn't done yet. This was only the beginning of how I'd take back my power. The stunned silence in the church was thick enough to choke on. I could hear my father clear his throat, my mother whispering to him. She practiced. She really practiced, her voice filled with awe. On the other side, Declan's relatives shifted uncomfortably in the pews, their earlier smugness evaporating into something colder. Disbelief, maybe even anger. Declan didn't look proud. He looked furious. His jaw tightened. His eyes flicked toward his sister, then back to me. He wasn't shocked by my Gaelic. He was offended by it, like I had trespassed into a sacred space he wanted to keep me out of. That was the moment it really hit me. He hadn't been protecting tradition. He'd been protecting control. The priest, visibly flustered, hurried to finish the ceremony. Rings were exchanged, the kiss was brief, and before I knew it, we were walking down the aisle as husband and wife. The crowd clapped politely, though my parents' cheers cut through the stiff silence like sunlight in a storm. At the reception, things escalated. Declan's family didn't bother hiding their contempt anymore. I caught whispers as I passed, about my accent, about how I forced Gaelic into my vows, about how it was insulting that I'd tried to match them. Erin, seated near the bar, leaned toward me when I sat down beside her and muttered, "They're calling you a parrot, saying you rehearsed like a child mimicking sounds, not really part of them." I swallowed the sting. They were doubling down, refusing to give me even a shred of respect. But instead of wilting under it, I let the anger sharpen me. They thought they had humiliated me, but they didn't know I had one last card left to play. Dinner was served, speeches began, and I waited. Declan's father toasted in Gaelic, a long-winded story about the family's proud heritage. My parents clapped politely, smiling though they didn't understand a word. Then, Declan stood, raising his glass, giving his thanks to his family. Not once did he mention mine. Not once did he thank me. When it was finally my turn to speak, I rose slowly, my champagne glass trembling slightly in my hand, but my voice when I spoke was steady. I began in English, addressing my family, thanking them for crossing an ocean to be with me. Then, deliberately, I shifted to Gaelic. The room froze again. I looked directly at Declan's family as I said, "I may be American by birth, but I came here with love and respect for your language and your traditions. And while some have tried to keep me out, I chose to learn so I could stand here as an equal. Not less, never less." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Erin smirked, raising her glass high. My father beamed like the Texas sun. Declan's face, however, turned to stone. His mother's lips pressed into a thin, bitter line. Sayaban shifted in her chair, refusing to meet my gaze. For the first time that entire day, I didn't feel like the outsider. I felt powerful. But little did I know, the night wasn't done unraveling. Because after that speech, secrets began to crawl out from the shadows. Secrets that would change everything I thought I knew about my new husband. The reception buzzed with unease after my speech. My parents were glowing with pride. Erin gave me a wink that screamed, "Nailed it," and yet the other half of the room looked like they'd just swallowed vinegar. I thought maybe I had finally put them in their place, that the rest of the evening would pass in frosty silence at worst. But then Declan stood, his chair scraping sharply against the floor, and everything shifted again. He raised his glass, his voice tight but loud enough to carry across the hall. Well, wasn't that impressive? Our American bride showing off a few rehearsed lines. Quite the performance. His words cut like knives, each syllable dripping with condescension. A few of his relatives chuckled, others nodded in smug agreement. My heart clenched. This was supposed to be my partner, my husband, but instead of standing with me, he was undermining me in front of everyone. Erin's hand shot out under the table, squeezing mine, grounding me before I could crumble. I forced a smile and lifted my glass again. It's not performance, Declan. It's effort, something I thought we both promised each other when we decided to marry. My voice carried across the hall, and suddenly the laughter died. The tension was thick, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. As dessert was served, Erin leaned in close and whispered, "You need to hear this." She had her phone in her hand. The screen dimmed, but I could see a recording playing. Earlier, while I was greeting my parents, she had caught Siobhan and Declan speaking in hushed Gaelic near the bar. She hit play, and my blood turned to ice. Declan's voice came through, low but distinct. "She won't last a year here. This is about the land. The inheritance, not her. Once the marriage is done, she'll learn where she belongs." I gripped the table so tightly my knuckles whitened. My chest felt like it might collapse. It wasn't just his family conspiring. It was him. The man I thought loved me. The man I had defended to everyone. Aaron's eyes burned with rage. "You can walk away right now, Maddie. You don't have to go through with this circus any longer." But I didn't walk away. Not yet. Because suddenly the humiliation, the dismissal, the cruelty, it all made sense. They hadn't just been mocking me. They'd been testing me, breaking me down so I wouldn't question why I was really there. And if Declan thought he could use me like a pawn in some twisted family plan, he had no idea just how wrong he was. I sat there, my fork untouched on the plate, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. The recording played over and over in my mind. Declan's voice, cold and calculating, stripping away every illusion of love I thought we had. My stomach twisted. My marriage wasn't about love. It was about property, about control, about turning me into a placeholder in some family scheme. I glanced at Declan across the table. He was laughing with his cousins. As if nothing had happened, his arm draped lazily over the back of his chair. I studied him, really studied him, and suddenly I saw him clearly for the first time. The charm, the warmth, the tender moments, they weren't gone. They had never been real. They had been bait. Aaron leaned close again. "Maddie, we need to leave. Tonight, before they tighten their grip." But I shook my head. Not yet. Not like this. If I walked away quietly, they would still win. They would tell everyone I couldn't handle their traditions, that I wasn't strong enough, that I failed. No, I wanted them to see me rise, to see me walk out on my terms. When the music started and the first dance was announced, I took Declan's hand. He looked surprised, maybe even smug, as if he'd already won. We moved across the floor, the eyes of his entire family watching us. His hand on my waist felt like a shackle now, not a comfort. I leaned in, close enough for only him to hear, and whispered, "I know everything. I know why you married me. I know what you said about the land, about me not lasting. You thought I wouldn't find out? You thought I wouldn't understand?" His body stiffened instantly. He pulled back just enough to search my face, and I saw it, the flicker of panic in his eyes. The mask cracked, just for a moment. "Who told you?" he hissed under his breath. I smiled sweetly, spinning away as the music swelled. "Wouldn't you like to know?" The rest of the dance was stiff, mechanical. He kept trying to regain control, whispering sharp words through gritted teeth, but I just smiled at the watching crowd, playing the perfect bride. Inside, though, I was making a plan. Because this wasn't just about surviving humiliation anymore. This was about exposing the truth. And I knew exactly when I'd do it, during the final toast, when every eye in the room would be on me. The reception carried on, but every minute felt like walking through fire. Laughter echoed around the hall, glasses clinked, and Declan's family carried themselves with the smug confidence of people who thought they'd already won. I played along, smiling, dancing briefly with my father, making small talk with my cousins. But beneath my calm exterior, my anger burned hotter with every passing second. Declan tried to act normal, but I caught him watching me closely now, suspicion flickering across his face. He knew I wasn't broken the way he expected me to be. He knew I was holding something back. That made him nervous, and that gave me power. Finally, the moment came. The band played softer, and the master of ceremonies announced the last toast of the night. Declan's mother rose first, glass in hand, and spoke in Gaelic. Erin leaned close and translated under her breath. "We welcome Madison into our family, though she will learn that tradition matters above all else. We trust she will adapt." My stomach twisted, but I forced a smile and raised my glass like everyone else. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, letting the room settle into silence. My parents looked up at me with adoration, unaware of the storm about to break. Erin gave me a tiny nod of encouragement. Declan's family leaned back, smirks already curling at their lips, expecting another naive attempt at charm. But I didn't start in English. I started in Gaelic. "To the O'Malley family," I said clearly, "thank you for welcoming me today. But there is something I must share, something that cannot be hidden behind laughter or tradition." Gasps rippled immediately. The fact that I was addressing them fluently in their own tongue again was shocking enough, but the weight of my words made the room fall deadly still. I reached into my pocket and pulled out Erin's phone. With one click, Declan's voice filled the hall. The The recording played loud and clear, echoing off the walls. She won't last a year here. This is about the land, the inheritance, not her. Once the marriage is done, she'll learn where she belongs. The reaction was instant. My mother's face crumpled in horror. My father shot up from his chair, fists clenched. Declan's relatives shifted in their seats, shock flashing across their expressions. Siobhan's hand flew to her mouth. Declan shot to his feet, rage flashing across his face. "You don't know what you're doing," he shouted, his voice booming over the stunned silence. But I didn't flinch. I looked him dead in the eye, lifted my glass, and said, "No, Declan, I know exactly what I'm doing." The room erupted, shouts, gasps, chairs scraping. And in that chaos, I felt something I hadn't felt since the whole nightmare began. Absolute control. Declan lunged toward me, trying to snatch the phone out of my hand, but Erin was faster. She stepped between us, her arm extended, replaying the recording again for anyone who might have missed it. His exact words cut through the noise, undeniable, in his own voice. There was no spinning it, no claiming mistranslation. The older relatives whispered furiously among themselves. A few of the younger cousins looked mortified, their cheeks flushed with shame. Declan's father slammed his palm on the table, barking something in Gaelic, but the damage was already done. Their carefully built facade of unity was cracking wide open. I raised my voice above the uproar, steady and cold. "For months, you all spoke about me like I was an outsider who would never belong. You mocked me, dismissed me, and planned an entire ceremony I wasn't meant to understand. But I learned. I listened. And now I understand everything." The hall quieted enough for me to continue. My parents were standing now, their faces pale but proud. I turned slightly toward them. "You were placed in the back because they didn't want you to see what this wedding was meant to be. A humiliation. A show of power." Erin pressed another button, and a second clip echoed. Siobhan's voice, clear as day. "Once she's married, we'll handle the house papers. She doesn't need to know it's all in her name. Americans never ask questions until it's too late." A collective gasp swept the room. Declan's aunt dropped her glass, wine splashing across the floor. Declan himself looked like the ground had vanished beneath him, pale and trembling. I held my glass high and said, "This marriage was never about love. It was about control. It was about property. It was about making sure I was too blind to fight back." Silence. No one moved. No one breathed. Then I delivered the blow. But here's the truth. They forgot one detail. The civil paperwork isn't signed. This wedding, it isn't legal. I am not your wife, and I will never be. The hall exploded into chaos. Half the family shouting, others scrambling to leave, Declan standing frozen like a statue while his entire world collapsed around him. And me? I finally felt free. The shouting swirled around me like a storm, but at the center of it all, I felt strangely calm. Declan's father barked orders in Gaelic, trying to regain control, but his authority slipped further with every second. Some of the guests were already leaving, whispering heatedly as they passed me, eyes darting between me and Declan like they couldn't decide who to pity more. Declan's mother, Siobhan, stormed toward me, her finger stabbing the air. "You vile girl." She spat in English now, her accent sharp with fury. "You think you've destroyed us? You've only made a fool of yourself." I tilted my head and said, "Funny. It looks like your son and your schemes are the ones on display tonight. And in case you're wondering, the entire town is already watching." Erin lifted her phone again, showing the glowing red light of a live stream. Gasps broke out. Half the crowd turned in horror toward the camera set up at the back of the hall. Am I recording everything? Siobhan's face drained of color. "You wouldn't." "Oh, I would," I interrupted, my voice steady. "Because the truth doesn't need permission." Declan finally snapped out of his daze, his voice hoarse. "Madison, please, don't do this. We can fix it. I'll talk to them. I'll make it right. Just give me a chance." I stared at him, the man I had once loved, and all I saw now was cowardice wrapped in desperation. You had your chance. Every single time I asked for honesty, for respect, for just a sliver of loyalty, you chose silence. You let them humiliate me, and you joined them when it was convenient. He took a step closer, eyes glistening like he wanted me to see the tears that had finally gathered. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought you'd forgive me. That line broke something in me. I laughed, sharp and bitter. Forgive you? For conspiring to use me for land, money, and status? For treating me like I was nothing but a pawn in your family's games? Declan, forgiveness isn't weakness, and you don't deserve it. I placed my glass down firmly on the nearest table and straightened my shoulders. Tonight was supposed to be your family's triumph. Instead, it's their downfall. Remember this moment, because it's the last time you'll ever see me. My father moved beside me then, his presence solid, his hand on my shoulder. My mother slipped her arm through mine. Erin stayed close, her phone still recording, eyes burning with loyalty. And together we walked out of that hall, past Declan, past Siobhan, past every single one of them, leaving silence and ruin in our wake. The cold night air hit my face as I stepped out of the hall, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Behind me, the chaos of the reception still rumbled. Shouts, slammed doors, a family scrambling to contain a scandal they couldn't hide anymore. But I didn't turn back. I didn't need to. That chapter was already closed. We walked down the stone path toward the car waiting at the end of the drive. My father opened the door for me, and before I got in, I turned one last time toward the grand hall, where they had tried to strip me of my dignity. It stood there glowing in the night, but inside, their pride, their schemes, their so-called honor, it had all crumbled. The following morning, the fallout began. Erin showed me the live stream numbers. Thousands had already watched, and comments were pouring in. Some praised me for standing up for myself. Others expressed shock at the O'Malleys, a family once considered pillars of the town. By noon, local papers had picked up the story. American Bride exposes O'Malley wedding scandal. The headline made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because it felt like justice. Declan tried calling. Dozens of missed calls. A single text message slipped through. "I'm sorry. Please, let's talk." I didn't reply. Siobhan sent me an email dripping with venom, accusing me of shaming them, demanding an apology. That one I saved for my lawyer. Within a week, the O'Malley reputation began to rot. Their property dealings were scrutinized. Clients pulled out of contracts. Even their own extended relatives distanced themselves. Erin later told me that people in the village had started whispering a new nickname for them, the family that tried to trick the American. As for me, I filed no lawsuit. I didn't need to. The truth was punishment enough. And more importantly, the marriage had never been legally binding. I wasn't tied to Declan, not by vows, not by papers, not by anything. A month later, I was back in Chicago, walking through the familiar streets of my hometown. The weight I'd carried for so long was gone. Friends hugged me tighter, family looked at me with new pride, and Erin, my best friend, my sister in all but blood, stood by me through it all. Sometimes people ask if I regret it. If I regret falling for Declan, moving across the ocean, trusting people who only saw me as a tool. And the truth? No. Because I found out who I was in the middle of that nightmare. On the night they tried to silence me, I spoke louder. On the day they tried to break me, I stood taller. And when they thought they had the last word, I took the mic and I wrote my own ending. And that ending was freedom.